All right, so my plan for the semester is for me to go over any of the problems from the classwork in these YouTube videos that I upload, so that hopefully you guys can try the classwork first on your own, see where you struggle, watch the videos, have me go over the concepts you weren't sure on, and then that'll lead right into the Cengage homework. So here is the first few questions from the first classwork. The first one asked me to match the experimental unit with the variable in the study. So basically what that means is we're trying to study a specific variable. Where do we get one unit of information? If we're trying to find the age of a dog, basically one dog provides that piece of information. So maybe we're trying to find the average age of all the dogs at a certain shelter. Then to find each piece of information, each piece of data, we'd go to each dog and write down their age. So the age of dog would have an experimental unit that's one dog. Sometimes they put a plural on this when you're answering it in Cengage, but in general, I'm always going to write it as the singular. One piece of information comes from this one thing. If I'm worried about what dose a certain medication is, I can get that from one medication. The number of dogs per birth would come from each dog birth. So one dog birth would tell me how many there were. And then the average number of pets seen per day, I'd need one veterinarian to tell me what that number was for them. So again, all we're doing here in this first one is matching, here's the variable, where do I pull the information from for that variable? For number 2, we're asked to define the experimental unit where we don't have choices. So basically, if I'm looking at number of gallons in a pool, I have to think, if I'm going around trying to find the average gallons in a pool, where do I get one piece of information? That would be from one pool. If I'm trying to find the number of dandelions per yard, I would get information about how many dandelions were in 1 yard at each time. The color of the front door of a house, there's a couple acceptable answers here. I meant it to be one house that I get the information from, but if you decide to say one front door, that'd be absolutely fine given the way that it's worded. Next thing we're worried about after connecting variables to their experimental unit is defining the types of variables that we have. The first choice we have is whether something is qualitative or quantitative. If it's quantitative, it has an underlying numerical scale. If it's qualitative, it just really can be put into a category, but I can't make distinctions between the categories, which one belongs where. So here, if I go through the variables that we've looked at and say whether they're qualitative or quantitative, the age of a dog is quantitative. I could line up all the dogs in the room, from youngest to oldest. There'd be an exact order that everything happened in. Dose of medication, also quantitative. This dog takes 3 tablespoons, that dog takes 2. I could see the differences in the medication dosage. Number of dogs per birth, also quantitative. In this case, one dog birth might have 10 dogs in the litter, another might have 8 puppies, whatever the numbers. Again, there's a naturally occurring numerical scale. Average number of pets seen per day, also quantitative. Number of gallons in a pool, quantitative. Number of dandelions in 1 yard, quantitative. And finally, the color of the front door of a house. This is the first one that's different. I probably should have mixed in a couple other qualitatives, apologies. But basically, in this situation, if you have one house that has a white door, another house that has a red door, you know which one goes into which category, but you wouldn't say, oh, white comes before red or red comes before white. There's no naturally occurring numerical order to it. That's why this is a qualitative variable. After looking at these variables in number 3 and discussing quantitative or qualitative, question 4 asks me to go back to the quantitative ones and say, are they discrete or continuous? Really, the distinction here between discrete and continuous, discrete only has whole number answers, continuous can have parts of a whole. So when I look at the age of a dog, if I'm measuring it in years, I can definitely have a dog that's part of a year old. It doesn't have to be exactly a 10-year-old dog or an 11-year-old dog. It can be 10 years and 14 days, whatever you want it to be. For that reason, this would be a continuous variable. Dose of medication. I used earlier 2 tablespoons, 3 tablespoons. No reason it couldn't be 2.5 tablespoons. You can have part of a whole in the dose of a medication. That's why it's a continuous variable. Number of dogs per birth is not something where I can have part of a whole. Either the puppy was born or the puppy was not born. For that reason, you can only have whole number of answers. That's why this would be a discrete variable. Average number of pets seen per day. If it was number of pets seen per day, that would be a discrete variable. You can only see 10 or you could see 11. You can't see 10 and a half pets in one day. That said, because it says average number of pets seen in a day, the average can be a decimal. It could be that I saw 10 pets today and tomorrow I see 11. On average, I'm seeing 10.5 pets. So when something that was originally discrete is now seen as an average, it can become a continuous variable. In this case, this would be continuous. There's no reason that a pool has to be an exact number of gallons. It can be 40,702 gallons, 0.5. It can be anything it wants. There's no reason that it has to be a whole number of gallons. That's why, again, this is continuous. Number of dandelions in 1 yard has to be discrete. If I go into my yard and I count the number of dandelions there, there's no way to have half a dandelion. For that reason, this is a discrete variable. Last one, color of the front door was qualitative. I don't need to distinguish continuous or discrete for qualitative. On the paper test that I usually give, I have students write neither here, but basically for what you need to know for this class, if it's quantitative, only then do you need to discuss whether it's continuous or discrete.